Welcome to the fiscal year 2024 recommended budget. This video provides a brief overview of how the City of Boston will fund the FY24 budget, including its general fund revenue, capital revenue, and American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding. For more information on the transformative investments this budget makes, please see the companion video on investments. Let's start with how the city funds its day-to-day operations. Each year, Boston is required to produce a balanced operating budget in which total general fund revenue equals total expenditure. The city collects a variety of revenue sources that make up the general fund. The FY24 general fund revenue budget totals $4.28 billion, an increase of $274 million, or 6.8% from last year. This table shows a breakdown of the city's revenue sources and their share of the total budget and the percentage change from last year. Property tax is the city's largest and most stable source of revenue for the operating budget. This single source brings in 72% of the city's total operating revenue. Property tax is broken into three parts: last year's tax, or base, a 2.5% increase on last year's base, and new growth. Every year, the city is allowed to increase its property tax levy by 2.5% per state law. In FY24, this will add an additional $75 million, which you can see here in red. An additional $60 million will come from new growth. New growth is generated from the value of construction and renovations. You can see new growth in yellow. In raising revenue through property tax, the city is mindful of minimizing the burden on residents. By taxing commercial property at higher rates than residential property, and by offering a robust residential exemption, both at the maximum amount allowable under state law, the city annually saves residents thousands of dollars each year on average. Together, these efforts have yielded a homeowner property tax bill that is 19% lower than the statewide average, as you can see in the chart on the right. The next largest source of revenue for the city is state aid, approximately 12%, or $514 million, of the city's operating revenue. In FY24, the state aid will be increasing by roughly $5 million, a 1% increase from last year. In addition to aid, the city has also charged assessments to help pay for the MBTA and charter schools. In recent years, increases in assessments in yellow have outpaced aid dollars in red. The blue trend line shows net state aid, which in FY24 shows a $13 million decrease from last year. In fact, state aid has fallen over $200 million, or 62%, over the last 20 years, when it made up 30% of the city's general fund. This has increased reliance on property taxes and other revenue sources. Another major revenue source is local receipts, which is made up of 4 categories. For comparison, the last 5 fiscal years are shown in the figure. Fiscal year 2024 figures are shown in teal. The first and largest category is excises, on the far left. These are taxes assessed on specific goods such as motor vehicles, hotel stays, and restaurant meals. They account for 4% of the general fund and are projected to increase by $103 million, or 68% in FY24, reflecting a strong rebound in our local economy from the pandemic. The next 3 categories are typically grouped in a bucket called departmental revenue. This bucket consists of licenses and permits, which include building permits, fines, which are mostly parking tickets, and other department income. A catch-all category that includes revenue like the payment in lieu of taxes program and interest on city investments. Together, these 3 categories represent about 9% of the city's operating revenue and are expected to grow $71 million, or 24%, in FY24. As you can see on this chart, local receipts, the blue bars, were disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The combination of excises and departmental revenue fell $190 million, or nearly a third, between FY19 and FY21. To help soften the impact of revenue shortfalls during the pandemic, the city was able to tap into federal dollars provided by the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. The city used $55 million in 2022 and $40 million in 2023. With local receipts returning near pre-pandemic levels, the city will not be using any ARPA revenue replacement funds in 2024. More discussion on ARPA will appear later in this video. Moving on to capital revenue. While the general fund revenue we discussed funds the city's operating budget, the city's capital plan is funded differently due to the nature of capital investments. The city maintains a large inventory of capital assets that are funded in the capital plan, such as our roads, bridges, parks, and municipal buildings. Boston's $4.2 billion 5-year capital plan is financed through a combination of sources. The largest source of funds is the city itself. Roughly 3/4 of the capital plan is funded through the sale of general obligation bonds that are paid off over 20 years, which you can see here in blue. A general obligation bond means that this is a type of debt where the full faith and credit of the city is pledged to repay the principal and interest on the bond. The city also supports the capital plan with other local revenue sources, such as the parking meter and surplus property funds. State and federal grants, here in yellow and green, contribute 16% of the revenue that supports the capital plan. With a strong local economy, AAA bond rating, and balanced operating budget, the city will issue bonds totaling $2 billion over the next 5 years, which will finance hundreds of new and ongoing projects, including the construction of new schools, libraries, community centers, and roadways. The last major revenue source funding our transformative FY24 budget is federal ARPA funding. Boston is expected to receive over $550 million from the American Rescue Plan Act and coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, which will help us respond to the economic and health impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The funding can be used to support direct COVID-19 response, supplement lost city revenue, as we previously discussed, and to help stabilize Boston's businesses and families and address systemic challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. Through March of 2023, $169 million has been spent. Thank you for taking time to learn about revenue, and to learn more, please visit budget.boston.gov and boston.gov/recover.